Picture a giant sloth. Most people build the same image, a regular sloth, the kind hanging upside down in a hammock pose on every nature calendar, just scaled up to the size of a delivery van. Slow, sleepy, harmless in the exact same way, just bigger. That image is wrong in almost every way it's possible to be wrong.
I direct your attention to this point here on the bone. The striations suggest a creature of immense proportion, far exceeding any living elephant.
And spend their entire existence walking the ground on four legs, sometimes rearing onto two. At least one branch of the
I direct your attention to this point here on the bone. The striations suggest a creature of immense proportion, far exceeding any living elephant.
Enormous furry manatee. Another grew bony plates directly into its own skin, manufacturing armor the way an armadillo does, a feature nobody confirmed until scientists pulled out a portable X-ray machine. And the most respected founding father in American history looked at the claws of one of these animals and became convinced, for a little while, that he was looking at a man-eating lion that might still be alive somewhere in the unmapped American West. He told Lewis and Clark to keep an eye out for it. This is the real story of the giant sloth, not the cartoon, not the cute, slow cousin of the thing in your hammock photo. Something stranger and in a few specific ways, something that should genuinely unsettle you. In the spring of 1796, miners digging for saltpeter in a cave in western Virginia broke into a chamber full of enormous bones. Among them was a claw core nearly 10 inches long, attached to bones from a forearm and a partial leg, all clearly belonging to something built on a scale nobody in North America had ever documented. The bones eventually reached Thomas Jefferson, then the sitting vice president of the United States, an avid amateur naturalist. Jefferson examined the claw, compared its proportions to the skeleton of an African lion, and did the math. The animal these bones belonged to, he calculated, would have been roughly 3 times the size of the largest lion alive. In March of 1797, he stood in front of the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia and presented his findings under a name of his own invention, Megatherium, Great Claw. He believed it was a predator, not metaphorically. He believed it might genuinely still be walking around. Jefferson held what historians call a completeness of nature worldview. The idea that a balanced natural world simply didn't allow species to disappear. If the bones were real, the animal in his mind had to be real somewhere too. A few years later, when he sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark west on their expedition, he asked them to keep watch for a giant clawed predator hiding in territory no naturalist had yet reached. Here's the part Jefferson didn't know yet when he gave that speech. Just days before his presentation, a paper had landed in Philadelphia from a young French anatomist named Georges Cuvier, describing a skeleton dug up years
I direct your
earlier on the
attention to
banks
this
of a
point
river
here on
in
the bone.
Argentina.
The striations
Cuvier
suggest
had
a
named
creature of immense
Megatherium,
proportion,
great beast,
far
and he'd
exceeding
done
any
something
living
nobody
elephant.
else had thought to do carefully. He looked closely at the teeth. A predator's teeth are built for shearing meat, all sharp edges and points.
I direct your attention to this point here on the bone. The striations suggest a creature of immense proportion, far exceeding any living elephant.
Whatever this thing was, it wasn't hunting anything. Jefferson got hold of Cuvier's description just in time to add a postscript to his own paper before it went to print, quietly walking back the lion comparison. The claws hadn't changed. The animal he'd built an entire predator theory around turned out to belong to something that spent its life pulling down tree branches to eat leaves. Strange piece of irony to sit with. The man most associated with founding American science, looking at the most intimidating weapon nature ever built onto a sloth, and concluding reasonably, given what he had, that it had to belong to a killer. He wasn't being careless. He was looking at real evidence and drawing the conclusion almost anyone would draw. That's exactly why the giant sloth's reputation problem has never really gone away. The claws still look like a verdict. They aren't one. Start with the size, because it's almost impossible to overstate. Megatherium, the largest and best known of the South American ground sloths, weighed somewhere between 3 and 8 tons. African bull elephant. Standing flat on all fours, it was already taller than a grizzly bear at the shoulder. Rear it up onto its hind legs, using its massive tail as a tripod for balance, and the animal could reach roughly 6 meters into the canopy, 20 feet, nearly double the height of an adult elephant. Now look at the claws that started Jefferson's entire misunderstanding. Each forefoot carried 5 long, curved, blade-like claws, so large and so curved that the animal couldn't actually walk on the soles of its feet. It walked on the outer edges, knuckle down, the same way a modern anteater does, because the claws themselves got in the way of putting a paw flat on the ground. It looks, from a distance, like a weapon platform. Up close, the job those claws were actually built for was almost entirely domestic, hooking high branches and dragging them down to mouth height, digging into hard soil for roots and tubers, and once in a great while, if something pushed hard enough, defense as a last resort, not a first instinct. For decades, scientists assumed an animal carrying claws like that, on a body that large, had to be supplementing its diet somehow, maybe scavenging, maybe outright predation. It's a reasonable hypothesis to test, and in 2017, a team led by paleontologist Hervé Bacharans finally tested it properly, not by looking at worn-down teeth, which don't show clear wear patterns in these animals, but by analyzing the actual chemical signature of collagen extracted from Megatherium bone. Carnivores and herbivores leave measurably different isotope ratios in their tissue, built from a lifetime of digesting different kinds of food. The result was about as clean as a result gets. Megatherium's diet was exclusively plant matter, full stop. No meat, no scavenged carcasses, an elephant-sized animal that ate like an oversized cow, armed like something out of a nightmare, purely by evolutionary accident. But here's where the story gets more complicated. Megatherium is just one branch that sprung from one tree, and not every branch tells the same story. In 2021, a separate research team examined a different, smaller relative Mylodon darwini, a heavily built ground sloth from southern South America, using an even more sensitive technique, isotope analysis at the level of individual amino acids within the collagen, rather than the bulk tissue average. The signature they found didn't match a pure herbivore. It suggested Mylodon may have been supplementing its plant diet with actual animal protein, at least occasionally. The finding is contested, and nobody is suggesting these animals were predators in any meaningful sense. But it means the tidy, simple story, all giant sloths were strict vegetarians, isn't actually settled at all. Different branches of this family may have been doing very different things with their digestive systems, and we've only just started being able to tell the difference. And Mylodon has one more secret that took even longer to surface. In the 1860s, naturalist Prehistoric described finding small, scattered bony fragments embedded directly in preserved Mylodon hide recovered from caves in Patagonia. In 1906, a German scientist ran an early portable X-ray machine over preserved patches. X-ray technology was nearly a decade old at the time, and documented a clear, repeating pattern in the bony fragments. Rows of star-shaped clusters there, distributed with obvious structure rather than scattered at random. Then the observation sat almost forgotten for over a century. In the 2020s, researchers in Argentina reran the X-rays with modern equipment and confirmed exactly what Burmeister and his contemporary had documented generations earlier. Mylodon had grown actual bony armor, called osteoderms, directly into its own skin, thousands of individual ossicles, ranging from lentil size to about 2 centimeters across, arranged in deliberate, ordered bands and rosettes across its body. Among living mammals, this trait exists in exactly one other group, armadillos, Mylodon's distant cousins in the same broader Xenarthran family. No other giant ground sloth lineage is known to have this. Megatherium didn't have it. The animal Jefferson mistook for a lion didn't have it. But somewhere in this family, at least one branch was building itself a literal suit of chainmail under the fur. And it took roughly 160 years from first discovery to general recognition for that fact to actually stick. In the Chilerosa Basin of southern New Mexico, inside what's now White Sands National Park, there's a stretch of ancient lakebed that only reveals its secrets under very specific conditions. The right moisture in the gypsum sand.
The Megatherium, a relic of the Pleistocene, lumbers across the arid landscape, a solitary giant in the fading light.
Sometimes for good. In 2009, a park biologist named David Bustos noticed strange footprints surfacing after rain, alongside the more obvious tracks of mammoths and dire wolves. Years of careful excavation followed. What the trenching eventually revealed was one of the rarest things in the entire fossil record, a directly preserved interaction, frozen The sloth tracks tell a story on their own. In long, straight stretches, the animal strides calm, roughly 3 feet between steps, an animal walking with nothing.
The nine-banded armadillo, a creature of the dusk, sniffs the dry earth, searching for its evening meal.
Researchers who mapped the site gave these a name, flailing circles. The spacing and rotation of the prints are consistent with an animal rearing onto its hind legs and spinning in place, hind feet planted, forelimbs swinging free. The exact defensive posture you'd expect from something trying to keep its claws between itself and a threat on every side at once. And weaving directly through those circles, in several separate locations across the basin, are human footprints. Not parallel tracks that happen to be nearby, tracks that step inside the sloth's own prints, on tiptoe in places.
This specialized UV light excites the residual organic compounds, allowing us to visualize the collagen as it is carefully extracted from the bone matrix.
Separate set of human tracks positioned a careful distance away from the main confrontation. Exactly where you'd want a second hunter waiting if the plan was to drive the animal toward an ambush, rather than approach head-on. Children's footprints turn up nearby too, off to the side. The kind of detail that turns a hunting scene into something closer to a family event. People of every age present for what was happening at the center of that flat. Nobody recovered a body. The research team is upfront about why. An animal this size, this muscular, is extraordinarily difficult to actually bring down with the tools available at the time. And even a successful kill in this particular spot wouldn't have left bones intact long enough to fossilize, given how the basin's wet-dry cycles chew through buried remains. What survived instead is something rarer than a carcass, a direct, physical record of the moment itself, not the aftermath, the encounter. It's worth sitting with what that actually means. Somewhere in this basin, at the tail end of an ice age that was already ending everything around it, a creature larger than a grizzly bear, with claws built to dig through frozen ground, spun in a tight defensive circle, while a handful of much smaller, much more fragile animals worked together to close in on it anyway. Using patience, positioning, and probably noise and distraction, the same toolkit modern predators use to break apart prey too dangerous to approach directly. The sloth had every physical advantage in that exchange. The humans had something else entirely, and the tracks are still there in the sand, recording exactly how that something else got used. Here's the strangest part of the whole story, and it's sitting.
I direct your attention to this point here on the bone. The striations suggest a creature of immense proportion, far exceeding any living elephant.
Almost any animal alive today to swallow whole and disperse the way the fruit's biology seems to expect. Researchers studying
I direct your attention to this point here on the bone. The striations suggest a creature of immense proportion, far exceeding any living elephant.
It evolved it for something built on a completely different scale. Animals exactly the size of a ground sloth or a gomphile, capable of swallowing the fruit whole and depositing the seed, unharmed, somewhere far from the parent tree. The fruit is still running the same evolutionary program it always has. The disperser it was designed for has been gone for roughly 11,000 years, and the plant never got the update. That's not a metaphor borrowed from somewhere else. It's the actual literal legacy of the animal this entire video has been been about sitting in produce aisles, waiting for a mouth large enough to use it the way it was built to be used. And here's the detail that should reframe everything you just watched. The slow, gentle, tree-hanging sloth from the opening image, the one everyone pictures when they hear the word, isn't a shrunken-down descendant of any of the giants in this story. It's a separate surviving branch of the same much larger family tree. One of the only
I direct your
lineages
attention to
left
this point
standing
here on the
after
bone.
everything
The
bigger than a
striations
house
suggest a
cat
creature of
disappeared.
immense proportion,
For most
far
of this
exceeding any
family's
living
30
elephant.
million-year history, sloth didn't mean small, it didn't mean harmless. And for one stretch of that history, in the waters off the coast
I direct
of
your
Peru,
attention to this
it
point
didn't
here on the
even mean
bone.
land
The
dwelling.
striations suggest a creature
So the
of
next
immense
time you see the
proportion,
hammock
far
photo,
exceeding
the
any
lazy,
living elephant.
upside-down animal moving in slow motion through the canopy, you're not looking at a miniature version of the giant sloth story. You're looking at the one branch of the family that happened to survive it, quietly hanging on in the trees while everything else its relatives ever built, the armor, the claws, the size, even an entire detour into the ocean, disappeared along with the world that made it necessary.